Thank you, whomever asked the question about the intergenerational challenge. And I am proud to say that at the Land Institute, we are a group of 4 generations. And it is, thank you also for providing me a great segue into our next conversation, which is between Wes Jackson and Eric Schlosser. And so we're getting both ends of the spectrum generationally here back to back, which is fabulous. So they're going to talk about how the new future is gone. I don't see Wes. Oh, there he is. Okay. He's never late. They're going to talk about how the new future is gone, which is a bit that you will read in The Inconvenient Apocalypse, the new book that's out. I also want to just acknowledge that Wes is, and you all know this, but I can't help but repeating it, the person who said that if our life's work can be completed in our lifetime, then we're not thinking big enough. I saw a quote, a wonderfully interesting thing written in the trailer that said that there are only a few species that have grandparents, and humans are one of them. And so I offer that as a through line about this generational thing that we're both grappling with and can be inspired by. Eric and Wes, come on up.
Well, I'd love for you to show the audience the title and the cover of your new book. It's called An Inconvenient Apocalypse. And Wes,
Die soon, they're going fast.
I'm really honored to share the stage with you. And before we get to the apocalypse, I'm really, really curious about the beginnings of your thought on a lot of these subjects. And, you know, yesterday I was talking about the Back to the Land movement, and I'm curious how much of those early thinkers were an influence on you. You know, the British leaders of the Soil Association who were really rethinking agriculture. You know, in getting to where you are now, I'm sort of interested in the intellectual journey and where it started.
So you don't want to know about this book?
No, I do. I really do, but I want the context.
Yeah. Well, the context is that, you know, I was born on a farm in the Kansas River Valley near Topeka. And I think the first offense I experienced as an environmental reality, I didn't know the word environment, and I didn't know why I was offended, but Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company built, this is during the war, WW2, the big one, they built a factory on one side of Highway 24 and 40. Then they built a factory on the other side of Highway 24 and 40. Then they just built right across the road. Now, all around there were people at work in fields with draft horses, with tractors, with hoes. That was the valley of diversity that fed, and it was the same all the way from Manhattan to Kansas City. But then here comes, and 2 highways, they get blocked by a factory on both sides. And how old was I? 8 or 9. Now, I didn't know that this was a problem I only knew that they were blocking traffic and they were disrupting my vision. I went to a 2-room country school. I had uncles and aunts on farms all around me, and my brothers were in the war in the Pacific. But what's going on here? So that's the first. Well, then you move through time, and 1950 comes up, and by golly, we're kind of glad this war is over. And there's even talk about, in fact, I got a book on this published in '46. It was my geography book. And they're bragging on the Soviet Union and the collectivization. And 3 years later, we get a Cold War started. All right, well, so what's going on here? You know, these are the people that helped us defeat Hitler. And then we move on. You see why you shouldn't have asked me.
No, I'm really curious because.
But the thing is, the people that were in my world, I began to hear people that were talking about all this. And so when I went away to graduate school, came back, I was beginning to get too connected to convention. But my students told me they wanted something relative the next time around. And I was teaching them biology. So I clipped and tore and I Xeroxed and I filed and I came out with Man in the Environment. Only 2 things wrong with the title. But the people that were, it was an anthology, the people that I represented in there, they were my teachers, and that was a consequence of clipping and tearing and Xeroxing and filing in order to meet the needs of the moment in 1960, well, it was 60. What year were you born, Sarah? Yeah. Yeah, 48, that's 68. So that then we were launched. And so, yeah, it was then David Brower, and it was all of the folk of that time, the Whole Earth Catalog. I went on the board of, what was the name of that board? What? Friends of the Earth. And what was the publication? Not Man Apart. And there we were. This wasn't publication in refereed journals, but it made a movement. And then it kind of drifted around and went away, and people with mature judgment saying you're alarmist. And so once you get on the road, there's somebody that will stand up. You're a fool. You don't know what you're talking about. Well, here is just one little thing. My next oldest sibling was born in 28. There were 2 billion people in the world.
Yeah.
My next oldest sibling died a year ago. We're approaching 8. Now, how hard is that? There's never been any time in the history. So there began to be validation of all of this. And so maybe it started with Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company.
Yeah. But you know, when you look back at the Back to the Land movement and the beginnings of the environmental movement, there was a really savage critique of industrial society, and yet there was also an optimism. You know, there was a Crosby, Stills, Nash Young song that was, you know, we can save the world, it's dying. And there were some very dark visions, like Paul Ehrlich's population bomb, that really suggested things couldn't be reversed, but a lot of the spirit was about possibility. And I'm wondering, you know, in terms of the book, when your vision began to change on that.
Yeah, Paul Ehrlich wrote the foreword to Man in the Environment. I'd known him as a graduate student at KU. But when did it change? I don't think it's changed yet. That we still have this optimism that is derived from the worst kind of religious fundamentalism. It's called technological fundamentalism.
Yeah.
To believe that we're going to solve these problems through technology rather than start acting in a decent sort of way.
Yeah.
I think that we're still not there to what our book is about.
Yeah.
And by the way, Bob Jensen, the only reason it says Jackson and Jensen is that A comes before E. You want to work that out. And we helped one another. He helped me a lot. And where did he get his radical nature? Well, it was out of leftist politics and other things. And he's a clear thinker. And so he helped me get the courage to say what we finally need to say.
Yeah.
And what a lot of my fellow environmentalists, I love them all, do not want to say yet. But we're saying, okay, folks, we got to figure out how to live within the deeper and deepening apocalypse. I think in a certain sense, we've been into apocalypse for 10,000 years since the beginning of agriculture. Mm-hmm. You know, and that the apocalypse accelerated 5,000 years ago with the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and that the apocalypse really took off in the coal, the oil, the natural gas. And all of those had something to do with carbon as the primary thing. So you look around, why aren't we gaining on this? I mean, we know what the story is. Why can we not do it? And so that's the reason that, well, the title we wanted was The Old Future is Gone.
Yeah.
But that doesn't sell like the title that was decided for us.
Yeah.
So, did I answer your question?
You know, I'm gonna push a little more to get that answer. When did you really start thinking about these problems in terms of the apocalypse? When did your own sense of where this movement was going and failing take you in a direction that you know, saw all of this human technology and agriculture as leading towards an apocalypse? I mean, is it in the last few years? Was there a precipitating event? Was it the failure to deal with climate change, or was it a confluence of things that brought you to this?
Well, this is an answer to your question. This is. But you got to be patient with it. When I was teaching at Cal State Sacramento, and we came back to this property right here, this 30 acres, and we made a decision, and I had tenure, I was full professor and so on, and we wrote up what it was that this was going to be about. And we said, devoted to a search for sustainable alternatives in agriculture, energy, shelter, waste management, and that we would spend half time in reading and thinking and discussing, and the other half time hands-on. It was wanting to get the hands-on to stuff. Well, then it was after that the idea of perennial grain polyculture came up. Now, we didn't have the language of a lot of the present, but I think we felt something was wrong. and enough that we quit.
Yeah.
And I mean, this barn is not what you would call something designed by an architect somewhere. But this barn is made out of railroad ties. We were able to put together something that would keep alive these growing ideas. Well then, and I'd be on the road giving a talk somewhere, and there would be the people devoted to local, organic, community supported. They had all that language, and they're our colleagues. And then somebody would raise their hand and say, are you optimistic? And because I saw the movement there, I'd say, you know, I'd think, yeah, I'm optimistic. Look, maybe we can get this headed off. Well, nothing changed other than an increase in the language. And so finally, I guess I'd have to say I'm into my 80s before I realized we're not going to do it. And that we better acknowledge, and that's when we got biblical. And you'll see in the book that how much we pull out of the Bible, but in a secular way. I happen to think that religion is the encoded language of behavior that serves to facilitate the transfer of energy through systems. And so there's a certain usefulness in all of that. And so that's where we have language of the apocalypse, and we have language of saving a remnant. Those are real.
Yeah.
And so we realize we ain't the first to have to deal with this problem. I mean, that idea of a saving remnant is old, and many times it pops up like toast throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah. And you know,
now, did that help you?
No. That did. I mean, I feel like it's in the last decade or so that you've stopped wanting to tell people a false optimism, and that this book is really the distillation of what you think is a hard reality that people need to confront. And there's no point in, especially people who care about these issues, to be in denial anymore.
Yeah.
Now, you know, when you look at other societies throughout history, there are great empires and great societies that, you know, the remnants of them are ruins that we can go and visit. And in terms of, you know, the apocalypse as you see it coming, is it specific to one nation-state society? Is it a more general one? I mean, the book of Revelations has a very, you know, detailed description of a certain kind of apocalypse, but what is it specifically that you think is going to happen, and how much time do we have to get ourselves ready for it?
Next question. Well, Bob and I have talked about this a lot, of course, and in the writing. And something about Bob that'll stiffen your back if you begin to get a little flaky. And I would say that all we had to do was look around at not just the denial that was showing up, but the people that deeply believed we had a problem but could not take themselves away from the possibility of a more proper kind of politics, or couldn't take themselves away from the technology. You know, my good friend who is good at technology, Amory Lovins, and we've had him here many times. It's hard to get him to talk about the social, political, economic, and even religious implications that come from our collective consciousness. And so we decided to burrow in all the way and treat it in a certain, maybe treat it like a person that's just been diagnosed as with cancer. Okay, what do we do? And what can we do? What do we do? And so that's why we tried to drive the conversation to a different level. And I think it is coming a bit. But we also, and if you're careful to read the very end of the book, which most of you will, first, just in case, you know, what we say is that and this is the last sentence, we end on what we believe is the most upbeat note possible, offering strong endorsement of love and action, recognizing that at our moment in history that love is bound to be harsh and dreadful, but it's still love. So it doesn't mean there's nothing left. There's nothing left, but it's going to be tough. And it's going to require, I think this becomes the great moment for Homo sapien, because we didn't know where we came from. We kept making up mythologies about where we came from. Most of those during or many of those at least that got published during the agricultural period of 10,000 years. And we kept thinking we're engaging in some kind of improvement. And look what happened in the last, say, 150 to 200 years. We now, because of the astrophysicists, know, based on verifiable data, about the journey from the Big Bang to the present. We now know of our origins in a way we never knew before. And we also have the Darwinian explanation on how life forms come into existence. We've got an understanding of where we come from and what kind of a thing we are. And we also are able to say, with it not being metaphorical, that the earth is our creator. You know, I mean, the journey from minerals to cells to we know that now, and we would not have known that without that highly dense carbon. So now, let's use what we have learned, and now all we got to do is figure out a way to stay amused while we live till we die cheap.
Well, you know,
independent, you know, of some kind of funny economy way of doing the business.
Yeah.
So if we can get that done, then we will make it we'll make it for a longer period of time.
You know, in the book, there are sections on determinism and geographic determinism about, you know, where industrialism and the scientific method began. And I'm wondering, in the sense of determinism, you know, if the apocalypse begins with agriculture 10,000 years ago and our dependence on carbon, was there ever any way that we could have averted the place that we're in? Or once we went down this path, as you look back at the movements that you were involved in, do you just think they were all doomed to fail? Or was there a moment when we could have changed course and we didn't?
I think that there are probably planets in which there are other intelligences like ours, because they're, you know, billions of Earth-type things, and they they will have enough of the proper combination to give us intelligent life form. And my bet is they will, and this is from talking to people that are physicists, that they'll all be carbon-based.
But I mean,
and some will be smart enough to figure out ways to head this off, and the rest of us will just not.
But
and
I mean,
I'm hoping we can be one of those some.
Were we doomed the moment that we stopped being hunter-gatherers, and the moment that we invented agriculture? Was the ending that you see coming present from the decision to change that lifestyle?
Yeah, that's my view. Because look, we were at least 200,000 years with the big brain, and it wasn't until 10,000 years ago that we started agriculture. It may be as many as 300,000, but this. I mean, where did it happen? I mean, why did it happen? It happened because of some consequences, probably. At the eastern end of the Mediterranean, we don't pay enough attention to the ice sheet. At the eastern end of the Mediterranean, it was drying out at the end of the Pleistocene, and that's where right there at the end of the Mediterranean, it became possible to get that highly dense carbon out of certain grasses that happen to have grown there, and get the grain, the carbon that was in that soil, what we call the young pulverized coal of the soil. I got that from Amory, by the way. Got allocated up into seeds, and the next thing you know, we now have little grains that can become actually what is the first money. It can be weighed. It had direct value. It came from the direct value of people growing it and harvesting it, and the next thing you know, we got an economic system. We're no longer merely gatherers and hunters. And so we were off and running. And we happen to have those rivers, and then we get religion. Most of the religion is a consequence of agriculture. And then when that Bronze Age and Iron Age was bigger than I think most of us appreciate, because we now had something to smelt the ore. I mean, we had the forests available to smelt the ore for the Bronze and the Iron Age, and that gave us a period in which we could then get ships that could go all the way to Spain, get more iron, and by golly, we do it. What do? We get swords and we get plowshares. Now, I've written that, they used to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. That's biblical. I say that the plowshares destroyed more options for future generations than the sword. Now, that clap.
In the book, you talk about the value of dithering as a sort of a solution or a way to sort of rethink life in the face of what's coming. And what does that mean more specifically? I mean, as a way of being and living.
Say again, the value of
dithering and a kind of what's the best response in a day-to-day way to the impossibility of averting the apocalypse?
You're asking what's the response?
Yeah. What would be the way to live? I mean,
what would it be like to stay amused while we live till we die, Chief?
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, And you'll note in here, we put quite an emphasis on scale. And we have a chapter in there about the 4 hard problems. It comes down to really, if you're looking for 2 things, fewer and less. Fewer people, less stuff. And the question is, can we make that transition downward in population and do it fast enough? This is what I think is on the line, is now speed. How much, well, we say that too. To downpower fast and get used to less stuff. And that's one reason I got this little art project of mine about looking to nature for the beauty. And that's the Art Without Ego project. Any number of us can go out and find beauty and start staying amused while we live till we die, enjoying the beauty of the earth. You know, enjoying this wonderful place yet. And then trying to, if we get communities that are small enough, and Dunbar's number, you know, it's like, what, 150 or so is the number of people that can operate together in a something or other. And I really think that scale is got to be paid attention to. Scale in size of communities and in organizations. More is different. And in fact, just to prove that, I'm going to tear out a sheet of here. I'll just tear out this sheet, an inconvenient apocalypse. One fold. You know where I'm headed, don't you? Two fold. Three fold. Four fold. Five fold. I can't go anymore. I can't go anymore. And if I were to have a piece of paper or cloth the size of that wall, I cannot get any more folds than I got here. More is different. We got to get a grip on that. We are not the same with too many people. We're not the same with what some would consider not too many, but are ending up doing stupid things, and they don't know why. I think that's part of the work that you're dealing with about prisons, yeah, and incarceration and so on. Why is that? I think that we're not paying enough attention to the folding of paper. And this isn't just, it could be anything. You just try to get the number of folds in there and you're not going to get it. All right, so that's for no extra charge.
So, I mean, in the face of this, you know, after the Second World War and after the revelation of the death camps and everything, you know, Camus wrote about the myth of Sisyphus, and his response to kind of the overwhelming darkness and evil was struggle and the continual fight against it. And in the myth of Sisyphus, the moment that Sisyphus is most happy is he's rolled this huge boulder up to the top of the hill, he gets it there, and then he starts seeing it rolling down. And that's the moment of happiness, because he realizes that life is struggle and he has to continue the fight. Even if there's no hope of victory, that what you do is you fight. Yeah. And where would you be on that?
Well, I mean, I'm right with Sisyphus on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, look, where do we find meaning? We find meaning when there is engagement in something that is perceived as necessary. And I find meaning out of dirt in the bathtub where I've just taken a bath. I've done something.
Yeah.
And I've had some joy in the use of the body. That's meaning. So you slush it around when you pull the plug to get it out of there so the next person doesn't have a bunch of dirt around the edge. But the larger point being is feeling about having done something that is at once necessary and useful. Necessary and useful. And that means and that's where community comes in. That's where we've got to learn how to, if we do that, it'll be easier to love one another. Now, it doesn't mean that you're kissing and hugging and making everything come out even all the time. But it means you're dealing with the connection. And we're more like the Upper Paleolithic, the gatherer and the hunter. I just discovered, or was finally able to admit, that I got attention deficit disorder. And I didn't realize that until I realized how much I'm unable to pay attention into a lot of things that are going on. I've tried to attribute it to, well, I already know enough of that and I don't need to know any more and so on. But I also think that there's still people that are bearing down. Well, I think in the Upper Paleolithic, my genotype was waiting. Everybody is focused around the campfire, deliberating about some important thing, but I'm looking to see if something's going to come in and eat us, you know. and so that's the value of attention deficit disorder. We need to start promoting attention deficit disorder in our schools.
Okay. Why do you think there is so much denial of the facts that you put forward in the book?
Well, nothing fails like success. And if you have those telling you we've got to keep the economy going, it's got to be more next year, we've got to be, I mean, that's just natural for people to want to have things better. And so I think it's probably built into the meat. It's built into the meat. That's where then we got to figure out what to do, that which is built in with the meat. That's the thing about, here's the big thing I think that's facing us. We all know that you can be in an argument at the Thanksgiving table with the uncle that keeps being mentioned that's obnoxious and tries to spoil the dinner. We keep hearing about that uncle. And what was I going to say? Yeah. I don't know what I was going to say. I'll get it later. But I was going to say something about, it was profound too. What did you ask?
I was asking about denial, about why is there the denial towards this hard reality that you wrote about?
Well, if things are going along well, then that's the way it was in the Upper Paleolithic.
Yeah.
And so then maybe there gets to be a change. Some other group maybe come over and start challenging because there's been a drought or something. But, you know, you're living kind of day to day. And so when things are going well, let's just keep on doing it. And rather than acknowledge that in industrial world that we are just a bunch of miners we're mining the ecological capital through the destruction of our ecosystems. And this then brings up, I think, the most important point for all of us. This big transition is going to require humanity to do something it's never done, which is to regard the ecosystem as the conceptual tool for the management of resources. Now, the ecosystems are what sustain us. We keep talking about species extinction. Well, we better be thinking about the systems that are integrated, and don't think, well, I can harvest this because it's useless, or I can harvest that because it's useless. Look, there's those of you that know me, I'll probably say, oh, there he goes again. There are atoms, then the next level up are molecules, and the next level up tissues, and the next level up organs, and then organ systems, and then what comes next? Organisms. What comes next is organisms. Now, the next question was, what comes next? And a guy named Feibelman is the one that raised that law of integrative levels. Well, what comes next? Some were saying species. Some said population. And no, not species or population. Jay Stanrow, who's spoken in this barn, said, what do the other categories have in common? Atoms, molecules, cells, tissues, organs, organisms. They all have contiguous volume. Species don't have contiguous volume. Populations don't have contiguous volume. Ecosystems do. So we're talking about solving problems using slabs of space-time. You got that? The slabs of space-time. Now, here's the problem. The slabs of space-time, what is the size of your slab? And is that slab this community? Now, we all know that the slabs are our calling out what the size is. It's us, because all slabs leak. Don't think you can just take care of your slab and not have something coming through like a storm. You know, but that's where you begin. We can't take on the universe. We can't take on everything, and that's why scale becomes important. We get a slab within a context of support for our food supply and engagement. But if you don't get that number down, then you're stuck with folding paper. You get that paper to the point you can't fold it anymore.
I think are there any questions?
Oh, we do not have time for questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I bet there are approximately 1,000 questions out here that would graciously be asked. So we're gonna wrap up. Wes,
Yeah,
you got the last word. That's how it should be.
Oh yeah. Well, this is pretty good. This turned out better than I thought.